Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Spoiled Rotten Movie Review Show. I wonder if I should give you guys like a name. Like everyone has like their name for their like fan base or something. I wonder if it would be shit like spoilers, maybe something like that. I just thought about that recently for maybe like when I say here and I talk to you guys. I just shouldn't just say hey hello everyone or hello YouTube. Maybe I should give you guys a name. So just let me know in the comments if you guys have a name you think would be cool for this fan base. If any of you guys have one, super cool. Love to hear it. Welcome to the second episode. I wanted to start this episode before we get into it and just let some scheduling stuff down and let you guys know what's going on. For this week, I am doing 2 episodes in order to catch up with the movie release schedule. So this week you're going to get the episode I'm doing today, or right now actually, and Alien Covenant, which is coming later today. And you'll see that pop up roughly around the same time this episode goes up, but it should be a little bit later on. So just look out for that one. But we're just going to talk about this film today, which I'll get into in just a second. But I wanted to let you guys know about that next week, after this week. I'm also going to be doing a 2-part basically episode where I put up 2 different videos on the same day. It's Memorial Day and there's 2 big movies coming out. You can probably guess what the movies are, but just in case I won't spoil it. Surprisingly enough, when I talk of a spoiler podcast, I don't spoil what my own episodes are. But yeah, you can expect those later on. But for right now, let's get started. Let's get started on the second episode here. Today we're going to be talking about King Arthur. This is the new Guy Ritchie film that came out last week. Wasn't that greatly received. Apparently it's not doing that well at the box office. Critics didn't like it. It didn't make a ton of money. But we'll get into it. I'll say I have some positives about this film. I also have some negatives. I don't think it's necessarily, my opinion, is spot on with everyone else's. I think mine's probably going to be a little bit different. So, you're here to hear me talk about the film. So why don't we get started? So let's talk about the plot first. I like talking about plot. It's always my first thing I like to talk about when I talk about a film. So the plot of this movie is that Arthur is basically, he's going to be the future king of England. But his father is basically killed by his uncle, and he's left to live in a Harlem, basically until he's a grown adult. But now that he's an adult, he's taken to receive Excalibur from the stone, and he's able to pull it up, and basically he's arrested immediately on the spot because he's the one who's able to pull it from the stone, and people think he's going to basically be the new king who's going to come up and rule. And he's not sure. He doesn't even remember his father dying. It was too young for him. But he doesn't want to be king. But a group of followers comes in. They get him escape from basically being put to death so that the people are quiet about their new king. But they're able to get him away before they are able to do that. They convince him to basically lead the people and become a king, and then it's him going up against his uncle to try to destroy him. Now, the plot of this movie, it's I like some ideas in it. I like the idea of Arthur being grown up in a Harlem. Or harem. I'm sorry. Have I been saying Harlem this whole time? That is totally on me. But yeah, it's harem. He's been growing up in a harem this whole time, and it's an interesting idea. Like, you always hear the one of like he grew up on the streets, but this one's kind of a little bit of a diversion of that, and I like it. Like the way they play with it, it's interesting. So that's an interesting idea. And I also do like the idea that he doesn't want to be king initially. He just is there to pull the sword of the stone and then be shipped off like everyone else, but he's able to do it, and he doesn't want to be king. That's the classic, hero doesn't want to join the journey, but does anyway sort of concept when you do the hero's journey. And they work well in this. I think that's fine. But honestly, there's a lot of problems with the story, just like right off the bat. There's a lot. The main problem is, when it comes to this plot, is how it's directed and edited, which I'll get into a little bit more later. But the problem is Guy Ritchie has this idea when he's editing films where he takes a normal scene, a scene that you would see in any other film, and he basically edits it in a non-linear fashion so that you see all these different events not taking place over, like, the time span you would normally see it, it's out of order, and then you kind of piece it together on your own because you're a smart human being, you can piece things together. But the problem is because he does this, a lot of things don't feel to add up. Like the emotional resonance you would get if the scene was just played normally is lessened because he's doing it in a non-linear fashion. And there's a particular scene, it's in the middle here, where they ask him to go to this place called the Badlands. It's his group of followers said, like, if you need to be the king and you want to do that, we're going to take you to this place called the Badlands. There's a lot of vicious monsters there and stuff, but it's going to teach you how to basically be a king, how to survive, and how to basically win this battle. But instead of showing like him through going through the Badlands and growing and becoming king, it's just a 5-minute flashy edit scene. And then it's over and it's done, and now he's king, and like he's ready to be king. It's like that felt like that went way too fast. Like you just went from bang to bang without any without like giving us a breath to be like, okay, I'm ready to accept that he's become king. And so you just end up with this sort of like you're out of breath, but you don't feel like you've been fulfilled like in the storyline. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that there's a lot of things that get left without any explanation why. First off, the character of Merlin, he's very intrinsic to the King Arthur storyline. Nowhere to be seen in this film. He gets like a brief cameo, but that's it. Like he's just like he's there in the background. He's not in it. Also, the second thing, they add this storyline to King Arthur where there's an idea of that the mages and man lived together for a period of time, but that one mage became treacherous and tried to take over the kingdom of man, that sort of idea, and England was like the battleground for that. And then like the king's brother, who's the king is Arthur's dad, had a brother who was secretly a mage, and he kills Arthur's dad and basically takes over, the last kingdom of man, or, whatever. And that's an interesting concept, and in a bigger movie, I would have loved to see it, but unfortunately, that doesn't ever come up again. Like, that's never, there's never, this idea of, there's a big war between man and mage, and the final battle is going to happen soon, and we need King Arthur to lead us against, this evil mage army. It doesn't happen. You just basically get the idea that this king that took over England, he was a mage, and basically he's just evil. And then the rest of the mages, we don't know where they are. We don't know what happened to them. We know Merlin's off somewhere, but he's in hiding, I guess. There's no real sense of that plot being anywhere in this film besides just in the background. And I never understood why they put it in there. You could have just said, all right, this guy, he's kind of has some magical powers that he got, because even they mentioned that he gets some of his powers from these weird octopus Ursula women that are sitting in his basement, that he has to kill a loved one in order to get more power, which is an interesting idea and concept, but again, not really that well used. You barely see those women. I think you see them twice in the film, and then that's it. And it's just not really there. And it's you have all these interesting ideas and concepts, but you don't use them. They're just barely there. They're just in the background, and that's not what's interesting about King Arthur. If you want to do something interesting about King Arthur, the two things you have to get right is the one, him pulling the sword from the stone, which they do. Granted to them, they actually get that scene very right. It's a very cool scene when he is able to pull the sword from the stone. Which we learned later is the stone is his father, which okay, I mean that was a weird concept that just seems out of a bad movie, but all right, sure, it's his father. I guess that's why he's able to pull it from the stone and not because he's the chosen king. They're trying to make something there, but I don't really believe it. That's just me though. But they get that scene where him pulling it out of the stone, very well done. It's very well made. Then the other thing is that it's very magical, and there's a lot of magical elements to it. And if you want to do a King Arthur movie, you have to explore that. You have to go into that. And they really just relegate it to the background and try to make it more an action film. More like, you know, like almost like Mortal Kombat in a sense, where it's like just a guy going up against another guy, and it's just their brawn, their wits, and their swords. And it's like, it didn't really work. If you want this to work, you need it to be more Lords of the Rings-ish, where you're not only getting into swords and, you know, monsters and things, you also need to be doing into, you know, the magic and all of that, and actually delving into it and not just holding it back and trying to rein it back. And I think that's where it fails, is because it's not willing to go all the way and not willing to go into that Lord of the Rings territory, where it's like, they're clearly doing Lord of the Rings in here. I mean, you got the big elephants from Return of the King, and you have, like, you know, the mystical wizard who's, like, you know, in hiding or whatever. Like, you have the elements there, but they're not willing to go that full step and just be like, this is how far we're willing to go into the fantasy world and actually commit to it. They're not fully committing to it, and I think that's kind of the problem. I don't know if that's Guy Ritchie directing the film, or if that is the studio not willing to let him go that far, but either way, I think that's kind of where it falls, is because they're not willing to commit to the storyline hard enough, and all these magical elements that are intrinsically a part of King Arthur are just kind of relegated to the background. So I think right there is where a lot of the problems come out of, is that there isn't this feeling of commitment to the story, and so you just get this sort of lackluster thing. Second part I wanted to get to was characters. The first one we should talk about is Charlie Hunnam as King Arthur. Now, I love the casting choice of Charlie Hunnam as King Arthur. He looks the part. He, like, when I think of, like, who King Arthur is, Charlie Hunnam is an absolutely perfect choice, both facially and physique-wise. That's a great choice. Honestly, I thought he would do a better job acting the performance. He gives an okay performance as King Arthur, but it's not great. It's passable. It's something where it's like, you're the generic hero who doesn't want to be a part of the journey but ends up going on anyway. And story-wise, it's fine, but acting-wise, he doesn't really sell it that well. Like, he sells it well enough that I was able to buy it, but it isn't that extra spark that, you know, an Elijah Wood would give it in Lord of the Rings, or you know, a Mark Hamill gave it in the original Star Wars, you know, any of those great movies where a hero doesn't want to go on the journey but then is forced to later on. He's not able to sell it that same way, and so you can't get this middle performance where it's like occasionally good and just occasionally he's just kind of stone-faced. Like, there's a lot of scenes in it where he's just like stone-faced, but then there's some scenes that he does a really great job in. There's a scene where he's, you know, getting pumped up and, like, ready for a fight, and he's just, like, pardon the term, but he's fisting the air, you know, up and down. There's another scene where, like, he's having to accept the sword and the responsibility after not wanting it, and he's kind of just, like, crying out in the rain. That's a really good scene that he's, like, able to perform in. But there's not a lot that he can do with that beyond that stuff. Like, there's just a lot of scenes where him is, like, just complete, like I mentioned before, he's just stone-faced. He's not emoting enough for me to care about this King Arthur, so it just kind of falls off in half. Jude Law is the villain of this movie. He plays Jude Law. No, he plays Arthur's uncle, but honestly, it's a Jude Law character. If you've seen a Jude Law character in a film that's not like, I don't know, Lemony Snicket, if you remember that film, then you know who's playing. He's playing an evil dirtbag, you know, the evilest of the evils. So you kind of know what you expect with Jude Law. Like, if you're getting Jude Law to play the villain, you're getting Jude Law to play Jude Law. So that's about as far as that performance goes. I don't think it's bad or good. It's Jude Law performance. Then we get to the worst performance in the entire movie. The mage girl, played by, I don't care enough to say that name and offend people, so it's going to be named the Mage Girl. That's her name for this entire review, because I don't want to say that name and get obsceniously crucified for trying to pronounce it, because that is absolutely ridiculous. I think her first name is Astrid, which I only know that's how it's said because I watched the How to Train Your Dragon films, and that has a character named Astrid in it, but beyond that, I'm not willing to go that far into her name. I'm just calling her the Mage Girl. She is awful. She's terrible. She is boring as sin. She gave me nothing to work with in the film. She just seemed like she was just there to talk in a very, I'm supposed to be wise, but I'm really not in any way interesting. I'm just wise person McGee, and that's all I do, and this is how I talk, and I'm normal, but I'm wise, and you should think I'm wise because this is how I talk. And it's just the most boring representation of like what a wizard or what like a wise person would be. Like, I get it. She's not like 80 years old, but you can still be like young and wise and portray that off very well. And they don't do that in this movie. She just is kind of there. She's boring. I don't care about her character. Every time she was on the screen, I was kind of like, ugh, this again. All right. And, we must take her to the Bloodlands. And it's like, yeah, you're not interesting. You're boring. Stop it. And they just kept going with the character. I don't like the mage girl. She's awful in this film. Jimon Hansu's in this film, once again giving a great performance and being sent to the second character reel because, he's barely in this film. He's one of the followers that King Arthur has, and I love Jimon Hansu in any film I've seen him in. He's amazing, but he always gets relegated to this like second like character arc, like whenever it was The Legend of Tarzan or Guardians of the Galaxy. Just anytime I see him, he's always in the background. He's never given that like front role character, and I love to see him get one because he is so great. He's great in this film. Like every time he was on screen, I loved him, but man, was he trying to hold up a very, very like middling cast that wasn't doing so great. But he was great. I love him. And the rest of the cast was pretty unremarkable. Like there wasn't any character that was like, oh yes, that guy. Like I remember there was a character named Blue that was like a little kid, and that was it. There's just like little boy Blue, I guess. But yeah, nothing really stood out as far as character wise. Like Jimon Hansu was good. Charlie Hunnam has good scenes, but overall isn't that great. Yeah, it's just kind of, there's no good real character in this movie. It's just kind of all muddled and kind of blah. So as far as character wise, not great. Not really that great. Now I want to get back to something I mentioned earlier, but getting back to this in a sense, is directing and editing, because oh boy, I love Guy Ritchie films. I unabashedly love them. Those the Sherlock Holmes films, or The Man from U.N.C.L.E., or some of his other works that he's done. I love his type of stylish, over-the-top things that he does, both with his directing and with his editing. I love the way it just looks, it feels, it makes me happy. It's just cool. I that's what I would say. It's like, because a lot of people think like Zack Snyder's stylings and directing is cool. I guess he's my Zack Snyder, because when I see that, that's like, that is the type of like directing I like, more so than Zack Snyder's. Although I do sometimes enjoy Zack Snyder's directing, but I enjoy more Guy Ritchie's because it's more to me the kind of stylized directing that I enjoy. Unfortunately, with Guy Ritchie, he overdoes it in this film. He takes something that I like from him, and he goes too far with it, and he uses it too many times. Like I mentioned earlier, with his non-linear editing for normal scenes, the Badlands scenes is probably one of the best examples of like him going too far with the editing, because not only does he use it for that scene, but he uses it for at least 4 or 5 different scenes of him doing the non-linear editing thing. There is one scene where it does work, though, which I do love. It's a scene towards the beginning where he's talking to one of the king's officers, and he's telling him what happened, and they're going back and forth between all these different things, between like him talking to a trader outside the harem, him talking to George, the Chinese fighter, which is like he goes to every morning, him talking to Vikings and getting money from him. Those are all very, very like interesting moments put all together in one scene in a non-linear sense. It's a cool scene that he puts together, and he even does another scene which is very much like Michael Pena scenes from Ant-Man. If you've seen that film and you know what Michael Pena does in that film, he does a very similar thing involving his non-linear editing that he does in this film, which is also very cool. But he overuses it so much. There's a scene at the beginning where we see King Arthur go from a small kid to an adult in very fast-paced editing. And while that's a cool idea, I think it causes a problem for the rest of the film because we want to get behind this King Arthur. We want to know about him and how he grew up, and we sometimes, in order for that to happen, for that to work, you need time. You need like time to invest in the character. And when you're just throwing all the backstory into this quick, highly edited 5-minute segment, you can't really get much invested unless you actually take the time. I would have actually taken that 5-minute edited scene and expanded it to like a 30-minute, just like, here is the story of King Arthur from kid to king. And that would have expanded it more, because I think with at least this character, you need to feel for him. And if you don't, when he's older and you're going to Charlie Hunnam's performance, you're not going to be as invested. Where I think if I was more invested with him, I would be more invested in Charlie Hunnam's performance than I was watching it the way it is presented, because it just kind of comes off as dull and boring, and I have nothing even backing up the dull and boring, so it's just kind of blah throughout. Whereas if I had that like a strong 30 minutes before the Charlie Hunnam parts come in, I might have been more invested, and even through the like more blah acting that Charlie Hunnam gives, I still would have been like, okay, I'm rooting for you, dude. Even though you're not doing like the best performance acting wise, I can still root for this guy and still get into this character. Here, I just can't get as invested because you just threw all of this backstory into like this segmented thing that's just like quickly edited, and just like, we're just showing it to you because you need to see it, but that's it. We're not actually trying to put any time into this character or any thought into it. So that's why I think a lot of this film fails, is because he's overusing his stylized editing, and it gets really bad when it starts involving CGI, because the CGI in this film would be great if it was for the next, Warcraft, World of Warcraft CGI, trailer that was coming out, and it's like, the new World of Warcraft DLC pack coming this fall. I would be totally cool with the CGI, because that's exactly the look of the game, it's the look of the field, and it actually does look very much like Warcraft CGI. And I've put up with that sort of CGI before, especially in the film Warcraft, and also with Rogue One. One, I put it up with in Warcraft because it's part of a series that involves that sort of CGI, so I was like, okay with that. That was fine. And I was okay with it in Rogue One, because they were trying to basically recreate human beings out of CGI, and that's almost impossible in some senses. So I was willing to put up with a little bit of like weird video game CGI-ness in order to try to recreate these human beings that are intrinsically a part of the story of Rogue One. So I was okay with that. But here, I don't see the purpose in why it's this video game. Like, I get he's doing a stylized version of King Arthur, and he's kind of going for this weird thing, but it looks bad. It looks really bad. They have the uncle, again played by Jude Law. When he's not in human form, he has this like costume that he wears, but it's not a real costume. It's CGI. And it looks like something out of Mortal Kombat Annihilation. It is, oof. It's something that I saw and I was like, wow, that's. I didn't even realize it was his uncle when I first saw it. I thought it was just like, oh, did like the spirit of death come and get his dad? No, it's supposed to be Jude. It's supposed to be Jude Law, and that is so shockingly bad. I couldn't believe that was put in the film. Like, you need to spend more time on CGI, guys. Like, that's not acceptable for a film. You have to put more time and more effort into that. There's also a lot of scenes where when he has both hands on the sword on Excalibur, Arthur is just going around and swatting dudes down with the sword, and you can tell that it's not Charlie Hunnam, it's CGI Charlie Hunnam. And yeah, again, it looks like a video game. That's not good, because I'm willing to I have different mindsets for different mediums of entertainment. When it comes to video games, CGI could be lesser, just because I'm more focused on gameplay, on how I can play the game. So even if it doesn't look like the best CGI, as long as I can play it, and as long as I feel like I'm involved with the characters, I can deal with lesser CGI from those films. Although CGI is probably the most amazing in video games in even recent years. Things like Legend of Zelda, or just like all of those, or Fallout 4, something like that, where it looks really good. But with movies, you have to up your game. You cannot be at the same level as a video game, because with film is all about what you're seeing, how it's being portrayed to you sight wise. So if it looks bad, I can't forgive you, because that's the number one thing that you're supposed to get right, is how it looks. And if it looks terrible, I have to go, no, that's terrible. Like, there's nothing I can fall back on where I say like, oh well, at least the gameplay was good, so I didn't mind the terrible CGI. No, there's none of that for a film. So to have film CGI that's that bad, I'm sorry, you can't. That's not acceptable. You have to go back and actually make it look somewhat decent. I understand stylization, but there's a difference between stylization and just cheap effects, and that it was a cheap effect that they used both for Jude Law's uncle and with King Arthur swinging that sword. It's bad. It's pretty bad. So yeah, a lot of just like terrible CGI, bad editing, poor directing. Although there is some good editing in here, because it is a Guy Ritchie film, and he has some creative ideas on how he makes films and stylish ways in which it looks. But it's mixed too much with bad editing and bad directing, and it causes like a bad mix, and it even makes look like the good stuff in the film look terrible because of how much it looks like the bad stuff. Like, I kind of have to separate in my mind what looks good stylistically and what looks bad in the same style, because you're dealing with one style, but there's two ends of the stick on that style, and I have to like go through each one and be like, was that on the good side or the bad side? And there's a lot of bad in here. I have to be honest. There's a lot of bad CGI, a lot of bad editing, and it's more negative than good. There's some good in there that you can find. As for like the rest of the film, I guess like you can pretty much guess the ending. Like, he beats his uncle eventually. Like they don't really, like, they just have the ending where they're all just sitting in like a rock and they fight each other, and then it's over, and he wins. He becomes King Arthur, and he gets the Knights of the Round Table. They don't bring in Merlin. I was hoping they would, because like I thought maybe maybe it'll be a surprise actor that'll come in as Merlin, and he'll surprise us and be like, oh yeah, maybe that would be interesting to see, even though we're never getting a sequel with this. But I was hoping we'd see something just like involving Merlin, or something that would come in the third act, maybe bring up this movie a little bit, maybe be like, you know what, if you just want to see a film for that character Merlin, for this actor or whatever, I would totally be okay with you going in and watching it. But it just doesn't happen. Like, Merlin just is barely there. I don't know. This film is pretty bad, but I do see a lot of Guy Ritchie's flares that I love in there, so I can't be super harsh on it. But when it comes down to it, like, it's still a lot of bad CGI, bad editing. There's a poorly constructed plot that's a tangled mess. It's a total mess when you look at it, because it's just like scenes not where they should be. There's, it's scenes that are out of order when they shouldn't be, just like taking Guy Ritchie stylization, going too far with it. It's just not, it's not good. It's pretty awful. And even though I like Guy Ritchie and I have that good feeling about him, and when I see the good version of him in this film, I want to be like, I like that. But I just can't get past poor characters, a messy plot, bad directing and editing, and terrible CGI. So, in the end, I'm probably going to give this film about a 3 out of 10, mainly because there are parts of the directing and editing I like. Even though a lot of the stylization is used poorly, I do like the style of it, and I think it could work in a better sense. But right here, it just doesn't work. They don't use it well. And unfortunately, it just didn't come together as a whole piece. Although I can see the vision. I can see where he was going with this and what he wanted to do with it. and there are some good things about it. I do like parts of Charlie Hunnam's character. I enjoy Jude Law just because I like Jude Law, but it's nothing more than a Jude Law character. And Jimon Hansu, even though he's in the background, I enjoy his performance. It's just a few little things that keep it from being the worst of the worst. Because generally, when I think about films that I absolutely hate and despise, there has to be at least a scene that is like, you're dead to me film. And this film almost has one towards the end with the fight scene between King Arthur and his uncle. But it never got so far where I was like, you know what, just forget this movie. This film was awful. I hate this. It was there enough where it's like, this is awful, but I'm not really that upset. I'm just sort of meh. Like, personally wise, I just felt meh. But I knew, like, intellectually wise, this is awful, and this is not the way you should be directing it. But personally, I didn't feel like I was upset with it or I was mad at it. I was just kind of like, yeah, you tried something and it didn't work at all. So overall, I'd say it's a 3 out of 10. I wouldn't really recommend anyone see this. Like, there's nothing I can say that's like, no, just for this scene you should see it. Like, it's nothing that's worth seeing. Most of you probably haven't even seen this film anyway, and because this film is bombing at the box office right now. And if you thought Monster Trucks from back in January was gonna bomb, this film is gonna bomb so hard. They already said they're reporting like $150 million in losses. That is, wow. That's like John Carter bad. And so, yeah, no, that's my thoughts on King Arthur. Let me know what you guys thought on this film. What'd you think about, the stylization that Guy Ritchie used for this film? Was it good? Was it bad? Did you like the editing? Did you hate the editing? I actually I took my parents to this film, and they actually really enjoyed the film. My mom was there, and she actually really enjoyed the way this film was put together. So I'm saying I don't like it, but I could see people who like this film and would say, yeah, that's a cool like way he did it, and I like the stylization. I like Charlie Hunnam. So if you like this film, totally, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Leave it down in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe and like this channel. So that's it for my thoughts on King Arthur. Later today, you'll see the episode go up for Alien Covenant. But until next time, guys, I'll see you later, and keep on watching.